George Russell crossed the line in Canada with a fastest lap so extreme, rival teams thought the timing screens were broken. Seconds later, engineers from McLaren, Ferrari, and Red Bull were already comparing telemetry, questioning acceleration data, and demanding answers from the FIA. Because what Mercedes just exposed may be far bigger than one fast lap. This is the terrifying part. The FIA reportedly found new evidence hidden inside Russell's Canada data. Not rumors. Not social media theories. Actual patterns that suddenly made teams inside the paddock panic. And the numbers are what shocked everyone most. Russell was gaining time in parts of the circuit where Mercedes were not even expected to dominate. Corner exits. Traction zones. Power delivery moments where the car looked almost unnatural compared to the rest of the grid. The lap looked too clean. Too efficient. Too perfect. And now, the same FIA pressure that Mercedes thought they survived may be turning into a full nightmare right before the championship reaches its most explosive stage. Because if the FIA really uncovered something unusual behind that lap, this could become the scandal that changes Formula One's balance of power overnight. The moment George Russell finished that lap in Canada, the reaction inside Formula One was immediate. Not celebration. Suspicion. Because engineers up and down the paddock were staring at the timing sectors trying to understand how the Mercedes suddenly looked that fast in those specific parts of the circuit. And the deeper analysts went into the data, the stranger the laps started to look. At first, people assumed it was simply a perfect run. Formula One drivers occasionally produce magical laps where every corner connects flawlessly. But this did not feel normal. The acceleration traces were drawing attention immediately. Especially out of slower corners. That is where rival teams reportedly began noticing unusual patterns in how the Mercedes delivered speed onto the straights. Not only powerful. Smooth. Almost too smooth. Think about it like watching two identical cars leave a traffic light. One spins the tires slightly before gaining speed. The other launches perfectly, instantly, every single time, without wasting motion. That second car always looks suspiciously efficient. That is exactly what engineers believed they were seeing from Russell's onboard data in Canada. And this is where panic started spreading quietly through the paddock. Because Formula One teams understand something casual fans usually never see. Raw engine power alone does not create a lap like this. The delivery matters. How the energy arrives. How stable the rear stays during acceleration. How smoothly the systems transition power from corner exit to full deployment. Those tiny details are often where hidden advantages live. And according to growing discussion after Canada, the FIA reportedly became interested in new telemetry evidence linked specifically to those transition phases during Russell's lap. That changes everything. Because once the FIA starts examining telemetry behavior closely, teams become extremely nervous. Telemetry is like a fingerprint in Formula One. It tells investigators how the car behaves second by second. Throttle input, battery deployment, acceleration curves, energy release patterns, everything. And rival teams immediately understood the danger for Mercedes if the FIA believed something inside those patterns looked unusual. Now, it is extremely important to stay accurate here. There has been no official public confirmation proving Mercedes broke regulations. That distinction matters enormously. But investigations in Formula One often begin long before formal accusations appear publicly. Sometimes the FIA simply wants clarification. Sometimes they want additional technical explanations. Sometimes they compare systems more deeply after rival teams raise concerns. And Canada suddenly became the center of all those conversations. Because the lap was not only fast, it was consistently fast in places where Mercedes had not looked dominant before. That is the detail teams cannot ignore. Imagine a basketball player suddenly hitting impossible shots from angles where they normally struggle. Coaches immediately start reviewing footage trying to understand what changed. Formula One works exactly the same way. Every unusual gain gets analyzed obsessively. And according to paddock speculation surrounding the Canada weekend, some teams now believe Russell's lap may have exposed a deeper performance trend that had been quietly building for several races. Not obvious to television viewers. Very obvious to engineers. Especially when they compare GPS overlays and sector behavior between cars. And here's where the pressure on Mercedes became brutal. The FIA was already under political pressure before Canada. Rival teams had spent weeks questioning Mercedes' performance gains, especially regarding engine behavior and straight-line efficiency. So when Russell suddenly delivered a lap that looked almost surgically precise under acceleration, suspicion exploded instantly. McLaren started asking questions. Ferrari started looking deeper into the sector comparisons. Red Bull reportedly became especially interested in the corner exits. Because those are the moments where hidden systems, clever energy deployment, or technical interpretations can sometimes reveal themselves most clearly. And this is where the story becomes much bigger than one lap. Because once teams suspect a hidden advantage, they stop focusing only on the current race weekend. They start revisiting old races, old telemetry, old onboard footage, searching for patterns, searching for consistency, searching for proof that the advantage existed longer than anyone realized. That is exactly how Formula One political wars begin. Quietly at first. Then suddenly, the entire paddock becomes obsessed with one team. And now Mercedes may be entering the most dangerous phase of all. Because if the FIA really believes the new evidence from Canada deserves deeper analysis, every dominant Mercedes performance from earlier this season could come back under the microscope too. What makes this situation terrifying for Mercedes is that Formula One investigations almost never stay contained. Once the FIA begins looking deeper into one suspicious performance, rival teams start pushing harder behind the scenes. Quiet phone calls, technical questions, requests for clarification. Suddenly, one fastest lap becomes a full political storm. And according to growing paddock tension after Canada, that process may already be happening. Because engineers are no longer only talking about Russell's lap itself. They are talking about patterns. That word matters enormously in Formula One. Patterns are what teams fear most during investigations. One strange sector can be luck. One incredible lap can be talent. But repeated behavior across multiple races? That is when suspicion becomes dangerous. And some rival teams reportedly now believe the Canada lap exposed behavior they may have overlooked earlier in the season. Especially during acceleration phases. Especially when Mercedes deploy energy coming out of slower corners. Think about a video game where one player somehow exits every corner with perfect traction while everyone else struggles slightly with wheel spin. At first, it looks impressive. Then eventually people start asking whether that player discovered something hidden in the game mechanics. That is the kind of conversation spreading through Formula One right now. Because the more engineers reviewed Russell's Canada lap, the more unusual the consistency appeared. The rear of the car looked calm. The power delivery looked immediate. And most importantly, the speed gains looked repeatable. That last detail changes everything. Repeatable performance is what triggers deeper FIA attention. Because repeatability usually means systems are behaving exactly as designed. Now again, there is no official public confirmation that Mercedes violated regulations. That must remain absolutely clear. But in Formula One, teams do not wait for official verdicts before starting political battles. The moment uncertainty appears, pressure begins instantly. And Red Bull understand that game better than almost anyone. Historically, Formula One's biggest teams weaponize scrutiny constantly. If they believe a rival advantage exists inside a technical gray area, they push the FIA aggressively until answers appear. Sometimes publicly, usually privately. And Mercedes now find themselves directly inside that pressure cycle. Because Canada arrived at the worst possible moment. The championship fight is tightening. Russell's confidence is growing rapidly. Antonelli remains under pressure internally. McLaren are trying desperately to stay close. Ferrari cannot afford to lose more ground. Now suddenly, the FIA is paying even closer attention to the team sitting at the center of all that tension. That creates enormous instability. And this is where the psychological pressure inside Mercedes could become as dangerous as the technical scrutiny itself. Imagine being an engineer working overnight on the car while rumors spread across the paddock that the FIA is reviewing your systems more closely. Every adjustment suddenly feels risky. Every setup decision becomes sensitive. Every data transfer gets double-checked internally. That environment drains teams mentally. And Formula One seasons are long enough that mental fatigue becomes a real competitive problem. Especially when rivals keep applying pressure week after week. But the deeper issue for Mercedes may actually involve George Russell himself. Because now, every extraordinary lap he produces will automatically trigger suspicion. That is the trap. If Russell dominates again, critics will say the Canada evidence explains everything. If Mercedes suddenly lose performance, rivals will claim FIA scrutiny forced changes behind the scenes. Either outcome creates damaging narratives. And drivers feel that pressure immediately. Because Formula One is not only about driving fast. It is about driving freely. The moment a driver feels every onboard clip will be analyzed frame by frame for controversy, natural confidence becomes harder to maintain. Especially under championship pressure. And this is where Canada may become a turning point for the entire season. Not necessarily because Mercedes are guilty of anything illegal. Because Formula One political wars change championships even before investigations finish. The suspicion alone alters behavior. Media questions become more aggressive. Rival teams become more united politically. The FIA faces growing pressure to appear proactive. Fans begin questioning every result online. And suddenly, Mercedes are no longer only fighting for victories. They are fighting for credibility too. But here's the most explosive part of all. According to growing paddock speculation, the FIA may now be comparing Russell's Canada telemetry against data from previous race weekends. And if those comparisons reveal matching performance patterns, this investigation could become far bigger than anyone inside Mercedes expected. If the FIA really started comparing George Russell's Canada telemetry against previous races, then Mercedes may now face the exact scenario every Formula One team fears most. Not a single investigation. A pattern investigation. And those are far more dangerous. Because once investigators believe they may have identified repeatable behavior, the focus shifts completely. The question stops being, was this one lap unusual? Now the question becomes, how long has this been happening? That changes the atmosphere instantly. Inside the paddock, rival teams reportedly began revisiting older data almost immediately after Canada. Engineers compared acceleration traces, GPS overlays, corner exit behavior, battery deployment timing. Tiny details most fans never even noticed during a broadcast. And according to growing speculation around the situation, some teams believe there are similarities appearing across multiple weekends. That is the detail Mercedes cannot afford. Because similarities create narratives. And narratives in Formula One spread incredibly fast. Imagine a magician performing one impossible trick. People are impressed. But if the exact same impossible movement appears in every performance afterward, eventually the audience stops admiring the trick and starts searching for the method behind it. That is exactly what rival teams are doing right now. Searching for the method. And this is where the FIA's role becomes extremely delicate. Because Formula One's governing body cannot afford to appear passive during a major technical controversy, especially when multiple top teams are reportedly demanding answers at the same time. McLaren want transparency. Ferrari want clarity. Red Bull wants scrutiny. And the FIA suddenly finds itself under pressure from every direction. That pressure matters enormously. Because once the FIA feels political heat from several teams simultaneously, investigations often become much deeper and far more aggressive technically. More data requests. More system checks. More comparisons between legal software behavior and suspicious telemetry patterns. And now Mercedes must prepare for the possibility that every aspect of Russell's Canada lap could be dissected piece by piece. Sector by sector. Corner by corner. Acceleration phase by acceleration phase. That level of analysis becomes exhausting for teams. Because modern Formula One cars generate gigantic amounts of data every second. Reviewing all of it while defending technical interpretations can overwhelm even the most organized engineering departments. And meanwhile, the championship continues moving forward with no pause button. That is what makes situations like this so brutal. Mercedes still need to race. Still need to develop the car. Still need to manage the growing tension between Russell and Antonelli internally. All while the entire paddock watches them differently now. And here's where the pressure on George Russell himself becomes enormous. Because Russell may now carry the burden of becoming the public face of the controversy. Every interview becomes dangerous. Every answer gets analyzed. If he sounds too defensive, suspicion grows. If he sounds too relaxed, rivals claim Mercedes are hiding confidence behind the scenes. There is almost no safe path through situations like this. And Formula One drivers understand that instantly. Especially experienced drivers. Because reputations in this sport are fragile. One investigation can follow a driver's career for years, even if no rule-breaking is ultimately proven. That psychological weight changes people. And perhaps the most dangerous part for Mercedes is that rival teams know exactly how to exploit moments like this. Red Bull have historically mastered political pressure campaigns. Ferrari understand how to amplify technical controversies publicly. McLaren, fighting directly against Mercedes in the championship battle, have every reason to keep the scrutiny alive as long as possible. So even if the FIA eventually clears Mercedes completely, the damage may already be happening in real time. Distraction, pressure, internal stress, narrative warfare, and Formula One championships can absolutely be lost through those factors alone. But here's the truly explosive possibility emerging after Canada. What if the FIA investigation does not reveal an illegal system, but instead reveals a legal interpretation so clever that rival teams simply failed to understand it earlier? That possibility may actually scare the paddock even more. Because if Mercedes found a fully legal solution hidden inside the regulations, then Canada was not the beginning of their problems. It was the moment everybody else realized Mercedes might still be ahead of Formula One again.